Okay, it's live.
Do 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 do. All right, 1 second. Do 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 do. All right, Jordan Sheridan live. Jen will be joining us in a little bit. It's been quite the day, quite the day, quite the 2 days actually. In For status coup, we broke a major story yesterday. Sorry we're late, by the way. We are trying to push this story out as much as possible. We've gotten it up to 1,400 retweets, which, believe it or not, media tends to cover things if you could make it go kind of viral to force them to cover it. So we were going to start at 5:30, but then I got some responses from different folks, so just got delayed. I wish we had producers and things like that so that we had more help when trying to push out a story. Anyway, major things going on. We're going to go through all of it. We also didn't get a chance to go through the whole story yesterday because honestly, it's massive. I mean, there's literally like 4 or 5 different little bombs in there, and we only were able to get through like probably half of the story. So we're going to talk a lot more about what we uncovered and the just insane cover up. Also, we're going to show you it is starting to get some traction. Unfortunately, not by media because no, if you break the biggest cover up, government cover up of the 21st century, apparently media just sleeps in response to that. But it is starting to get some traction among politicians, celebrities, and obviously online. So really happy about that. I will remind you, and we'll keep pushing this in the super chat. If you have not retweeted the story tweet, I just put it in there. Definitely retweet the story tweet. It's not to build my Twitter following. It's to get more traction on the tweet. So then it helps try to get some media coverage on the story. So please retweet it. Smash that like button. It's right under the live stream. More people that press the like button, the more people will see this very live stream. So I want to start with a few things. And I think I might do a little bit of a rant later. But the you would think in a sane media world, that if an outlet obtains documents, if an outlet builds many sources showing that a governor and his team erased potential evidence, hid potential evidence, refused to give potential evidence to prosecutors, you would kind of think that's a big enough story to kind of even write a little story about, maybe a few paragraphs. But apparently not. I literally have emailed the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, the Flint Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Jen has emailed quite a lot of journalists. And one journalist, this was just incredible, from the Detroit Free Press. He told me, where is that email? Hey, Jordan, nice story. I read it yesterday on the Metro Times website, but I haven't heard of any plans for the Free Press to cover the story right now. So the Detroit Free Press, an hour down the road from Flint, the biggest news outlet in all of Michigan, they're not covering a massive government cover-up. Hold on one second. So it shows you in a large part, in a large way, how government cover-ups actually happen and why they happen. It's not just because there's shady, evil people in government, whether it be in Michigan or on the federal level. It's because most of them know there's a good chance we're going to cover things up, erase our phones, refuse to hand over documents, and the local media, the national media will look the other way. That is why we created Status Coup in the first place, because we need to have a journalistic coup d'etat of the status quo. And the status quo is upheld by the corporate media. So if you missed yesterday's show, let me give a brief recap of the first part of the story that we went through yesterday. And smash that like button. We got 160 people watching. Super chats are welcome too. Share this live stream. Sharing is caring. What we broke yesterday, and if you missed it, it's in The Intercept as well as the Detroit Metro Times. Here's the link to the Intercept story. I literally had like somebody on Twitter, a few people on Twitter being like, yeah, I'm not going to share it because it's The Intercept. I'm like, then I have no patience for you. And if your priority is it's in The Intercept rather than the fucking story and a massive government cover-up, then you're delusional. I said on Twitter to some folks. So we found what prosecutors found, that top officials in former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder's administration, Rick Snyder, by the way, who was charged in January with a misdemeanor for his role in the Flint water crisis, we found that his press secretary, so one of his top communications officials that would definitely be communicating with him during the Flint water crisis, her phone was erased when she left office in November 2015, shortly before the launch of a criminal investigation into the water crisis. Her phone was erased. Top officials in the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, including the state's chief medical executive and the health department's deputy director, so the number 2 official at the health department. When prosecutors got their phones, no messages were on them from all of 2014 all the way through October 2015. Why is that important? Flint was on the Flint River from April 2014 through October 2015. So these officials, there was no messages on their phone from before October 2015. The first messages that came up after October 2015. That's quite the coincidence that the period Flint used the Flint River, which, by the way, Flint residents had been complaining and going public, and the Snyder administration knew about those complaints about their water for 18 months. The communications were gone. Do we think they didn't communicate about this? Other parts of the story. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. That's the environmental department. A state health official, a county health official, so a local Flint official, didn't work for the state, worked for the county. He tipped off criminal prosecutors to what he was told by a state IT official, an IT official in Snyder's administration. And what this county health official told prosecutors was the IT official whose kid was on the same hockey team as the county official. The IT official told him soon after then Governor Rick Snyder's October 2015 press conference. So Snyder held a press conference in October 2015. Finally, after his administration ignored the residents for a year and a half, finally he acknowledged there's alarming lead levels in the water and we're getting Flint off of the Flint River. Period. We're getting Flint off of the Flint River. So soon after that, this IT official tells the county official, yeah, a bunch of phones from the state environmental department were brought to me in the IT office, quote, wiped clean. Wiped clean. The phones technically worked, but no information could be retrieved, meaning no messages, no phone call history. Soon after, the governor's press conference announcing Flint's water was toxic, which, oh, by the way, after that press conference, there were calls for a federal investigation. There were calls for a state criminal investigation. So the heat was on Snyder, the heat was on his administration, and according to the IT official, we'll say allegedly, phones were dumped off in his office, wiped clean. So this is the environmental department. You have phones allegedly wiped clean. The health department, we know there were top officials whose phones, those messages for those 18 months were erased because we obtained a subpoena from the criminal investigation that indicated which officials' phones were erased. So as I said yesterday, can you imagine if the corporate media, who has been covering the Capitol insurrection a lot, I think it's important. Do I think it requires 24/7 media coverage? No. They're obviously continuing to cover it 24/7 because they want to keep Trump's name in the news for ratings. It doesn't seem to be working because they're all tanking in the ratings. But can you imagine? Actually, no. Let me give you a better idea. Better analogy. Can you imagine if officials in President Trump's health department, the CDC, the federal health department, can you imagine if their communications from January 2020, February 2020, and March 2020 disappeared before coronavirus went public? Do you think the media would ignore that? Because that's kind of the same parallel here. Different illnesses. One's toxic water, one's an airborne disease. But at the end of the day, how do you investigate potential crimes, which you would only be able to really know who knew what when by obtaining digital communications? So 24 hours after we broke this story, the media is completely silent. The New York Times, nothing. The Washington Post, nothing. The Associated Press, nothing. CNN, nothing. MSNBC, nothing. The Detroit Free Press, the biggest newspaper in Michigan, crickets. The Detroit News, crickets. Flint Journal, crickets. How is that possible? How is it possible? Let's zero in on the Michigan outlets. That The Intercept and the Detroit Metro Times co-published a story showing potential tampering with evidence, potential obstruction of justice by officials close to the governor, by officials in his health department, and they don't feel the need to cover it? This is why I have said forever. This is why I have said forever that the corporate media exists to cover up the stories that they should be covering for financial reasons, to not lose access, for a whole host of reasons. But I want to show you who has been doing the job that the media should be doing. Colin, if we could first start with Mark Ruffalo, the actor Mark Ruffalo. He was nice enough to tweet out the story. You should definitely retweet his tweet. So he tweeted, We said all along that we believed that there was a cover-up and that the governor knew more information than he was putting out publicly. So that was Mark quoting from somebody that I got a quote from in the story. That was Mark quoting from him, linking to the story. Let's now move on to Congressman Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna said outstanding reporting by Jordan Sheridan and shocking revelations. I did reply, thank you, Congressman Ro Khanna, but let's not forget Jen, who co-reported the story with me. I see that sometimes. I don't think people mean it, but sometimes, I get the main credit, or if Jen does her own in the field reporting, you'll see comments thanking me. I know most people don't mean anything by it, but that's pretty insulting and a little sexist. Jen's her own person. She's a reporter. She's worked extremely hard on this story and her own stories. So if she's out there on her own, you don't need to thank me. It ain't nothing to do with me. So let's not forget that she is 100% a co-pilot on this story and status quo. So, but I appreciate, I know Congressman Khanna didn't mean anything by it. He probably didn't, he might have not even known Jen was on the story with me. But I appreciate that from Congressman Ro Khanna. Can we get something from Congresswoman AOC, Rashida Tlaib, who is from Michigan, represents Michigan? Can we see maybe something from Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, dare I say Bernie Sanders? But thank you, Congressman Khanna, for getting it started. I want to also show Erin Brockovich, who has gone to Flint and has spoken out about Flint. Erin Brockovich called this is the biggest cover-up story you're going to read. They poisoned the town of Flint and covered it up. The biggest cover-up story you're going to read. It's pretty strong words by Erin Brockovich. You'd think the media might pay attention if a legendary consumer and environmental advocate is calling this the biggest cover-up you'll ever read. I say the biggest cover-up of the 21st century. Susan Sarandon was nice enough to tweet it out. She said, how was Snyder, talking about the governor, only charged with a misdemeanor? And why has the democratically controlled House Oversight Committee not brought him back in for perjuring himself? I responded to that. Those are great questions that I would love. I would love. I tweeted it, Colin. I didn't reply to her. But that's a great question that Susan Sarandon, an actress and activist, is asking, that the New York Times could be asking, the Washington Post could be asking, CNN can be asking, MSNBC could be asking, dare I say, Michigan outlets like the Detroit Free Press, Detroit News, and the Flint Journal, Flint's hometown paper, maybe they could ask, because he was only charged with a misdemeanor, the governor. So I guess he just didn't know that his press secretary's phone was being erased, that his top officials at the health department were being, messages being erased, that environmental department officials' phones were, quote, wiped clean. Guess he was asleep. Must have been asleep. Marianne Williamson also tweeted. Really appreciate her. She tweeted out. Let me get it. If you could put it up, Colin. I think I sent it to you. If I didn't, let me send it. Oh, I didn't send it to you. That's okay. Marianne Williamson tweeted out. Actually, I could find it. Oh, there you go. Grateful to those who are staying on top of the story in Flint and refuse to let it go. So that's a couple celebrities, a politician. They have spoken, but the media has not. And as I told you at the top, A Detroit Free Press reporter said, yeah, I read the story. Nice. I don't think the Detroit Free Press plans on covering it. At what point do you say, no, this isn't lazy media. This is corrupt media. These are journalists, hell-bent on keeping this information bottled up, suppressed. We're not talking about like my opinion. This is documentary evidence. None of our facts have been disputed. In fact, the health department, when I asked them for comment on the erased messages, they literally said, we don't care to comment. That's about as close to you got us as it gets. And thank you for the super chats that are coming in. Let me read some of them. We got Colin, $2. Support the J Crew everywhere. Everyone. Thomas Horder, $1.99. Thanks. Peace Walker, $5. Hey, Jordan. Hope you and everyone at Status Quo are doing well. Just wondering if you will be covering the Medicare for All marches this Saturday. Yep. Jen will be covering the main one in D.C. We will be covering it. Chris, $2. This is for clowns not sharing this because it's The Intercept. Thank you. And by the way, can I just say to the growingly insane wing of the progressive movement, particularly those that live online, look in a mirror, slap yourself, and grow the fuck up. Seriously, look in a mirror, slap yourself, and grow the fuck up. Oh my God, we don't like Ryan Grimm. He doesn't rant against the squad hard enough. He doesn't rant. He doesn't hammer the squad over the head when he interviews them. So he's corrupt. Even though The Intercept, if you go to their front page, the overwhelming majority of their stories you will never see in a mainstream media outlet. They routinely report critically on the Democratic Party. But oh my God, they're not tough enough. They don't rant hard enough. So, we're not going to share a story about the biggest government cover-up story of the 21st century. The biggest government cover-up story of the 21st century. That kids are poisoned, still. Permanently damaged. Tens of thousands of people permanently damaged. But we're not going to share the true story of how it happened and who's responsible and who covered it up because Ryan Grimm. If that's you, you don't need to watch Status Quo. You could unsubscribe. Honestly, I don't want you. And I don't really care. Somebody said, fuck off, Jordan. Goodbye. If your priorities and your brain is that narrow-minded that your focus is on where it's published and who the editor is rather than the story, then you're part of the problem. You are part of the problem. And by the way, I don't really care if it gets me canceled. Thank you to Ryan Grimm for publishing this story. Thank you to The Intercept for publishing this story. Thank you to the Detroit Metro Times for publishing this story. If you don't like it, go listen to other news that gives you what you want 100% of the time, because I cannot be bothered with this stupidity. Moving on. So, what we broke yesterday was half of the story. There's a lot more. And by the way, again, if you haven't had a chance to do it, you retweeting the story makes a big difference. We're already at 1,400 retweets. We're already at 1,400 retweets. We need to get that to 2,000. The reason I want it up is not for me and my personal Twitter following. It's a lot of times the media will start covering something if it goes viral. So we need to get this as viral as we can. Please retweet it. Retweet it. So I want to get into more of the story. Colin, if you could bring it up. So let's start here. I'll copy and paste it so you could find it, Colin. I'm going to give Colin 1 second to catch up. By the way, Colin's coming up for a few days to learn live view, and he'll be traveling with me to Cleveland, where we'll be, I think by the end of next week, we will be in Cleveland to cover Nina Turner's election. I hope that doesn't trigger anyone, because, you know, there's a lot of progressives now ranting about Nina Turner. We'll be there to cover the election. So, Colin, if you could start here. The Intercept learned that departments, including MDEQ, which was the Environmental Department, and MDHHS, which is the Health Department, and you could get rid of my face and just show the full screen, Colin. Were tasked with creating timelines for their respective actions during the water crisis. But like many other things inside the Snyder administration during the crisis, the timelines were routed through Richard Baird. Richard Baird was the governor's right-hand man. Richard Baird described himself as the governor's fixer. If you talk to people in Michigan government, he was the governor's henchman. As I called him yesterday, he's the equivalent of a mob boss's consigliere. So the timelines were routed through Baird, who was well known in state government as Snyder's right-hand man and close friend, dating back to when Baird gave the governor his first job out of college. Baird's power as the governor's point man even drew jokes about him being a shadow governor. Upon reviewing the timeline, Special Prosecutor Flood's investigators determined that the State Departments had omitted important facts and events, according to documents reviewed by The Intercept. More so, they learned that the timelines were routed through Baird. The timelines from the Environmental Department and the Health Department were moved up the chain to the governor's fixer. Documents related to Flood's investigation include allegations by prosecutors that Baird falsified the timelines in order to provide state officials with an official story to tell if and when they were questioned about the water crisis. So this goes back to a lot of what I've been asking, none of the other media has been asking. Are smart, common sense people to believe that the governor's right-hand man, fixer, was fudging timelines that the state health department and the state environmental department were making about their actions and their roles during the Flint water crisis, which presumably criminal investigators would want to see those timelines. We're to believe that the governor didn't know about that? We're to believe that the governor didn't know his press secretary, her phone was erased when she left a month and a half before the launch of a criminal investigation? We're to believe that the governor wasn't aware that top officials, including the deputy health director and the state's chief medical executive, their phones' messages mysteriously disappeared from the entire period in 2014 and 2015 that Flint was on the Flint River? The governor was charged with willful neglect of duty. So that infers he neglected all of these things. That infers he didn't know about all of those things. I don't know. If the name wasn't Rick Snyder and the name was Donald Trump and all of these things happened under him, do you think the media would be silent? Seriously, do you think the media would be silent if Donald Trump's top health officials' phones, messages were erased? Or his environmental departments, the EPA's officials' phones were erased? If his chief of staff or one of his closest advisors, or let's say Jared Kushner, if Jared Kushner was falsifying documents, you think the media would just be like, oh, that's too bad. Now back to our regular scheduled bullshit. I mean, this is unbelievable corruption. This is almost arrogant, the arrogance of this cover-up. The fact that these people did this, probably because they kind of knew the media wouldn't look into it. I did. Jen did. I've been to Flint 17 times. I think Jen's been there 8 or 9. It's unbelievable, the corruption. And keep smashing that like button. Share this live stream. Let's get this to as many people as we can. So, back to the story. More than just allegedly false information, the timeline seemed to be missing important events linked to the water crisis. Quote, it appears that MDEQ, the Environmental Department, has missed a few items. That was Jim Henry who emailed that to colleagues. Jim Henry was a Flint area health official, so not with state, but a Flint area health official who was trying to get information from the state and data from the state on the Legionnaire's disease outbreak because it was happening in Flint. The state would not give Jim Henry and the county health department the information. Henry continued that email saying it appears that the environmental department has missed a few items, saying, quote, I doubt they want our help filling in the blanks, obviously referring to the environmental department is lying. The county health department knows they're lying. So there you go. In 2013, Baird and other Snyder officials used their private emails to communicate about a secret for-profit school model the Snyder administration planned on launching, ominously called Skunk Works. The move was par for the course for Baird, according to a former official with the Michigan Department of Technology, Management, and Budget, who alleged that the governor's right-hand man once chided them for sending an email about Flint to his official Michigan government email. Quote, don't ever email me there. Always email me on my Hotmail account, Baird allegedly told the former state official on a call soon after the official emailed his government email address. Quote, he never replied to the email. I think he was mad that I mentioned Flint in an email. The alleged command by Baird was in sync with his overall aversion to leaving an official paper trail. Colin, if you can come back to me for a second. I'm about to read to you one of the all-time greatest cartoon villain statements from a government official. And this was Governor Snyder's top advisor, right-hand man, who introduced himself to Flint residents. I speak on behalf of the governor. He's my best friend. This is what he texted. We obtained his text messages. What he texted the former emergency manager of Flint. Quote, trust me, amigo. Emails are fodder for our enemies' cannons. Let me repeat. Trust me, amigo. Emails are fodder for our enemies' cannons. Baird wrote to ex-Flint emergency manager Darnell Early in a March 13th, 2015 text message obtained by The Intercept. He went on to say, I suggest you default to the phone call or got a minute. Drop-by approach. I learned that the hard way. And what he's referring to, how he learned that the hard way, is he was scolded. I'll read this part, Colin. Baird and other officials involved in the Snyder administration's use of private emails continued into the Flint water crisis. Oh, excuse me. No, I got my dates wrong. But I'll read that in a second. But can you imagine? This is the governor's right-hand man. We have a former state official alleging that the governor's right-hand man freaked out on him for mentioning Flint and the water crisis in an email. He's then advising other state officials not to put anything in writing because it's enemies, it's cannons for our enemies. Do you think that kind of thinking, that kind of culture in the governor's office doesn't come from the top? Because I spoke with a lot of people, and I have a lot of sources who said people in the governor's administration, high-level people, they didn't put a lot in writing. And they spent a lot of time emailing on their private emails instead of government emails. You remember when the mainstream media was focused on Hillary Clinton using private email? Rightly so. They don't seem to care that Governor Snyder's top officials were using private email to communicate about the poisoning of a city that happened under their watch. Back to the story. A week later, Baird again texted Early, who at that point had moved on from his role as Flint's emergency manager to become emergency manager for Detroit's public schools. Baird wrote, "Sent you a note to the other email," presumably referring to Early's non-state government email. Early responded, "On it." Early didn't respond to the Intercept's request about whether Baird was emailing state business to his personal email about the Flint water crisis or any other issues. Well, we do know at the time he emailed, Early was a government official. He moved on as Flint's emergency manager to then become the emergency manager for Detroit's public school system. So he was a government official. He had a government email, but apparently Richard Baird felt the need to email him at the other email. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see. Don't worry about it. Baird and other officials involved in the Snyder administration's use of private emails continued into the water crisis. In December 2015, then Snyder Chief of Staff Jared Agan scolded Baird and Megan Holland, Snyder's communications director at the time, for using their private emails to discuss Flint water matters. In fact, Snyder himself used private email to discuss Flint water matters. His then spokesperson acknowledged at the same time the governor testified in front of Congress. The Intercept learned of other internal Snyder administration turmoil during the water crisis among Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, so the state health department officials, who stewed over what they felt was the administration prioritizing its own political survival over the public health crisis in Flint. In an April 2nd, 2016 text message obtained by The Intercept, Health Department epidemiologist Tim Bolin messaged Jim Collins, his boss, and the director of the Health Department's Division of Communicable Disease. In the message, Bolin condemned Becker, the Health Department's chief deputy director, and Sue Moran, deputy director of the Population Health Administration. Morons, all. They will all sink with their boss, and they will all deserve it, Bolin wrote, seemingly referring to Lyon, the MDHHS director. Soon after, Bolin texted Collins again. Quote, "No kidding. Send that last message upstairs. They have no clue how this makes us look. Really tired of the games they're playing. They appear to be more interested in political health than public health." Collins responded, "Hang in there, Tim. There are still good folks, despite the crap." I don't know, I'll be honest, I don't know who it was they were describing in terms of send that message upstairs. That could mean the top officials in the health department. That could mean the top officials in the Governor Snyder's administration. But that is two pretty high-level officials in the health department going back and forth with each other, complaining that this administration is prioritizing politics over actually helping the people that were poisoned under their watch. And by the way, this played out in real time because the governor, former Flint Mayor Karen Weaver was on the record with us in previous stories saying the governor's office was repeatedly begging her to announce that the water was safe again when there was no way it was safe again. They were pushing her, other Flint community leaders, to prematurely announce the water was fine. They were spending more money on PR to paint the picture that the water was improving than actually fixing the problem. And there's two health officials, their messages to each other showing that. Moving on. As Flint prosecutors and investigators discovered the lack of phone messages and Snyder's questionable internal investigations. They were also waging a 3-year behind-the-scenes legal battle with Governor Snyder and his attorneys. So we're about to go, we're talking 4 or 5 years ago, but it's very relevant. On June 10th, 2016, Snyder was served with an investigative subpoena, documents obtained by The Intercept show. The subpoena sought documents and communications that the governor and his top officials had about Flint water dating back to when the governor entered office in 2011 through June 2016. Soon after, Snyder's lawyer responded with 29 objections, documents obtained by The Intercept show, with Snyder's lawyer pointing out to the heavily redacted 117,000 pages of, quote, responsive documents that Snyder had already made public. So what they're talking about there, Snyder had released to the public thousands of documents. The only problem was a huge percentage of them were heavily redacted and, blacked out. And significant portion of them really didn't involve the Flint water situation at all. So the 100,000 documents he released, you couldn't see what half of them said, and the stuff you could see had no bearing on the Flint water crisis. But the governor's attorney filed 29 objections pointing to the insufficient documents he had released publicly. And by the way, the media had criticized the documents he made public, pointing out that they were heavily redacted. And a lot of the stuff he released had nothing to do with the Flint water crisis. Back to the story. A few months later, in the fall of 2016, Snyder, with no court order in place that compelled him to provide the documents criminal investigators sought, continued to withhold the majority of documents and communications that he was subpoenaed for months earlier, according to multiple sources familiar with the criminal investigation and documents obtained by The Intercept. With Snyder and his attorney stonewalling, Special Prosecutor Todd Flood pushed the Attorney General, there's his picture, the Attorney General is Bill Schuette, pushed the Attorney General to execute a search warrant on the governor's office. Multiple sources familiar with the investigation told The Intercept. But Schuette, a Republican who would go on to announce a run for governor to succeed the term-limited Snyder in 2017, denied the request. So, let me read. Flood's hands were tied. Schuette said you cannot execute a search warrant on the governor. A source familiar with the matter told The Intercept, adding that Schuette said the criminal team had to route all requests for documents through Snyder's lawyer. Quote, they weren't giving things, they weren't honoring subpoenas, the source told the Intercept. Moreover, the documents the Snyder and state departments under him were providing to investigators were missing crucial metadata, multiple sources told The Intercept, including the full length and sequence of email chains, which state officials were copied and blind copied on emails, and who the emails might have been forwarded to. It's the, quote, documents DNA, a source told The Intercept. Essentially, Snyder was sending screenshots of emails to prosecutors. Colin, come back to me. So, to be clear, the governor of Michigan was refusing to hand over the daily briefings he got as governor, which were huge packets. There presumably might have been things in there about Flint, about the water, about things that he claimed he didn't know about till 2016, things about the Legionnaire's disease. We don't know what he was told because he would not give criminal prosecutors his daily briefings. The ones he did give over were from periods that they were not relevant, really, to the water crisis. That should sound a huge alarm in the Attorney General's office. He also wouldn't give over briefings that were from the Environmental Department. He wouldn't give over Flint conference calls and the notes from those. There was a whole treasure trove of things he would not hand over. I've spoken with a few lawyers. That's obstruction of justice. And what makes it equally corrupt And this is part of the story that gets a little complicated, but it's important. Normally, in a criminal investigation of this scope, when you're investigating governors and government officials, you wouldn't be obtaining documents, cell phones. You wouldn't be asking the people you're investigating to hand over those documents, to hand over those cell phones, to hand over those laptops. You would issue search warrant. First, you would subpoena them, and if they didn't cooperate, you'd seize them through a search warrant. That's just like you don't have to go to criminal justice school. You would issue a search warrant and seize the documents, the computers that hold the documents, the emails, all of that. But the Republican Attorney General at the time, well, he had a little conflict of interest, didn't he? Because the special prosecutor that he appointed to run the Flint water investigation was supposed to be independent from the Attorney General. Think Robert Mueller was supposed to be independent from Bill Barr and have free reign to do what he wanted. But I know from many, many sources that was not the case. So the special prosecutor basically had to get it approved to go to the bathroom, much less to issue search warrants and all that. And the Republican Attorney General denied him and said, you have to go through the governor's attorney. Well, I don't know. Do you think it's relevant that the Republican Attorney General was running for governor to replace Rick Snyder, who couldn't run again? His term was coming up. Do you think it's relevant that the Republican governor, who would need Republicans to give him money, the usual corrupt donors to give him money, you think it's relevant that he was running to replace Rick Snyder and might not want to go crazy hard on Rick Snyder? Bill Schuette, the Republican Attorney General, did not respond to our request for comment. So essentially, what my source was saying is the special prosecutor, his hands were tied. He could not get certain things because his boss, the Attorney General, would not allow it. And he was at the mercy of the Attorney General. So they did the best they could without getting that information. And this, by the way, the Republican Attorney General, by allowing Rick Snyder and his attorneys to delay, to stonewall, from what I've been told by certain lawyers, obstruct justice, this delayed justice for years. And then you had the new Attorney General who came in, Dana Nessel, who decided to just clean house, fire the special prosecutor, fire the chief investigator, fire most of their team, and claim they didn't properly seek evidence or they didn't properly get all the evidence. Well, I don't really give a shit. I don't really know any of these people, the special prosecutor, the chief investigator, so I'm not defending them. But how are they supposed to get the evidence if your predecessor, talking about the current Attorney General, your predecessor put them in handcuffs and wouldn't allow them to get most of the evidence? By the way, I just told you, the governor was sending prosecutors documents and emails that had no actual metadata. Metadata meaning who first sent the email, who was it sent to, who was copied on the emails, who was blind copied on the emails, what recipient of the email then forwarded the email, who they forwarded it to. That's called metadata. The only things prosecutors were getting was just literally images of the email. Well, it's kind of important because you're investigating basically a digital crime. You're going to know who did what when through emails and documents. How do you investigate that if you don't know everybody that an email was sent to? You don't know who was copied. You don't know who was blind copied. You don't know which recipients forwarded it, and you don't know who they forwarded it to. This is blatant cover-up. And the Attorney General, the Republican Attorney General, allowed it to go on. He wouldn't allow them to issue a search warrant and just take Snyder's devices, which, by the way, to Attorney General Dana Nessel's credit, when she came into office, her prosecutors seized. They issued a search warrant and they seized Snyder's cell phones. That should have been done 3 years prior, but it wasn't because of a Republican Attorney General who was more interested in his political ambitions than justice for a poisoned community. It's not the fault of the prosecutors under him. It's not the fault of the special prosecutor, the investigators, the law clerks, the whole team. It's the fault of the Attorney General, who wanted to look like he was going after Snyder without doing it and pushing away Republican donors. Back to the story. Flood, the special prosecutor, moved to compel Snyder to comply with the original subpoena for documents in the fall of 2016, documents obtained by the Intercept show. So that's called a motion to compel in law. Soon after, Flood withdrew the motion based on a stipulated agreement with the governor's attorney. The agreement mandated that Snyder would begin producing the documents he was subpoenaed months earlier for on October 14, 2016. From there, the agreement said, the governor would continue producing documents on a, quote, rolling basis approximately every 2 weeks. On a rolling basis approximately every 2 weeks from the date of its first production. But still, with no court order in place to force the governor to comply, Snyder and his attorneys didn't honor the agreement, multiple sources told The Intercept, continuing to slow walk the criminal investigation. Around the same time, in October 2016, criminal prosecutors were tipped off that top officials in Snyder's administration, including his right-hand man, Richard Baird, had approached other state officials before their interviews with criminal prosecutors, according to documents obtained by The Intercept and sources familiar with the matter. Quote, it's come to my attention as recent as yesterday that some of the witnesses that we have been bringing in have been contacted by government or former government employees to talk about testimony that they may or may not give. Flood told Fiedler, a health department official, in a confidential interview in October 2016 obtained by The Intercept. Fiedler responded to the special prosecutor that no one had approached him to influence his testimony. While prosecutors interviewed Werfel, who was Snyder's press secretary, Flood also noted attempts by state officials to influence the testimony of other Snyder administration officials. Quote, there have been times where people have been contacted after testimony that have sat in investigative subpoenas before to talk about what they testified to, Flood told Snyder's press secretary. There have been, as disclosures have shown, people have been talked to in cases where witnesses have been talked to about what they should say in an investigative subpoena, meaning approached before they talk to prosecutors. If someone were to do that, I would consider it tampering with evidence and an obstruction, and I would charge anybody that would do that to you. In the January 21st indictment against Baird for perjury, extortion, misconduct in office, and obstruction of justice. Let me repeat that. The governor's top advisor, his self-described fixer, was indicted in January with perjury, extortion, misconduct in office, and obstruction of justice. Prosecutors referenced Baird's attempt to, quote, influence and interfere with ongoing legal proceedings arising from the Flint water crisis. In those charges, they referenced him interfering. So, Colin, back to me. Let me ask you a question. Again, let's just go back to the common sense question. Common sense. And thank you for the super chat. Nick Coletti, $4.99. Thanks, Jordan. What you do matters a lot to people. Thank you. I know she's not on, but thank Jen too, because she did this with me. Common sense. You have the governor's top advisor who introduced himself to Flint residents as his best friend and speaking on behalf of the governor. Flint officials said, if you were talking to Richard Baird, you were talking to Governor Snyder. Richard Baird was Governor Snyder's proxy. So you're telling me they have evidence that Richard Baird falsified timelines from the Environmental Department and the Health Department, that Richard Baird was tampering and obstructing the investigation by approaching state officials in the Snyder administration who were about to testify to prosecutors, approaching them to basically tell them what to say and tell them what not to talk about. And he was indicted on all these things. By the way, we broke for Vice last year, if you remember, that this same official, the governor's right-hand man, was going around Flint offering payoffs to the sickest Flint residents who were receiving media coverage because they were ranting at town hall meetings. Baird literally went in to sick Flint residents' homes and offered them for the state to pay for their medical treatment and a whole host of other things. You're telling me, and I'm saying this literally to the current prosecution team and the current attorney general, you're telling me that all of this was going on. Was the governor's henchman? Was he freelancing? Was he just doing this willy-nilly on his own? Because one of the sick families that Richard Baird, the governor's right-hand man, went into their home and offered them a payoff, they told us that at the end of the meeting, he said, Richard Baird, I'm going to go bring this back to the governor and talk to him about it. Snyder never responded to comment on that. Richard Baird never responded to comment. So according to a couple who Richard Baird tried to pay off, he said, I'm going to go talk to the governor about this pilot program. But truly, you don't need to be a legal scholar. How is it that this prosecution team, because as Jen and I reported previously for The Intercept, the original prosecution team under the Republican Attorney General and the special prosecutor, they had concluded there was enough evidence to charge Governor Snyder with misconduct in office, with willful neglect of duty, and at the time of their firing, they were building a case to charge him with involuntary manslaughter. To be clear, they were not ready to file those charges. They were building that case, but they had in their mind to build the case towards involuntary manslaughter, and they were building evidence towards involuntary manslaughter. By the way, two other journalists in Michigan confirmed that report, saying they independently confirmed that the original investigation was building a case to charge him with involuntary manslaughter. How is it possible that one investigation could find evidence for misconduct in office, willful neglect of duty, and at least felt they were 75% there, that's what I was told, 75% there, to charging him with involuntary manslaughter? But the current prosecution charged Governor Snyder in January with a misdemeanor that has the potential for a $1,000 fine and 1 year in prison. What a Flint resident called me was essentially a parking ticket. Thank you, Steve, $4.99. Keep shining the bright light on this crap. How is that possible that one investigation sees this and the other investigation doesn't see any of it? How is it possible that all of this is going on underneath the governor's nose? He doesn't know his right-hand man is going around tampering with evidence, trying to obstruct justice, trying to influence other state officials' testimonies. He doesn't know that his right-hand man is falsifying timelines. He doesn't know that his right-hand man is going around Flint trying to pay off sick residents. He doesn't know that his press secretary's phone is erased at the time she leaves, right before the criminal investigation. He doesn't know that his top officials in the health department, their phones mysteriously the messages from all of 2014 all the way through the fall of 2015 were erased? No clue. This governor had nothing to do with it. He doesn't know that allegedly his environmental department, officials from the environmental department, their phones were dropped off to the state IT office, and they were erased, wiped clean. He doesn't know about any of this. So either this governor was sleeping through 8 years in office, or he knew. He might have not directly been directing the orders, but he might have dispatched his right-hand man to do the dirty work. I don't think any serious, objective person or journalist would believe that it is possible the governor of Michigan, a governor is a chief executive. It's like the CEO of state government. It's not possible for them to know nothing. This is like Chris Christie. Oh, I didn't know they were shutting down the bridge. No idea. My administration was shutting down the bridge in New Jersey for political retaliation. This would be like, if not for the audio of Richard Nixon, if not for the phone call that showed he was spearheading Watergate, this would be like saying, oh, well, there's no evidence that Richard Nixon knew. And to add on to that, how in the world is it possible that the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, the Detroit Free Press, the biggest newspaper in Michigan, the Detroit News, another big paper in Michigan, the Flint Journal, Flint's hometown paper, I could go on, Daily Beast, BuzzFeed, The Atlantic, Huffington Post, add your pick. They don't think this is scandalous. They don't think it's relevant to tell their readers or viewers. Frankly, where the hell is the independent media? I know it's been 24 hours. I sent it to everyone I know in independent media. Other than retweets, crickets on one of the biggest government cover-ups of the 21st century. I was invited on to Tom Hartman's show. I went on there earlier. I'm going on with Abby Martin later. Not live, but recorded. Jen and I are going on with her. That's it. Nothing else. I guess they're still too busy fighting with each other. People want to call themselves progressive, yet they're ignoring a massive government cover-up. I don't care if it happened 7 years ago or 7 months ago or 7 minutes ago. A massive government cover-up over the biggest environmental calamity of the 21st century. That's what it is. Oh, I forget. Jen and I went on with Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper yesterday. So shout out to them. I don't think it's up yet, but they did have us on, Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper yesterday. So shout out to Matt, Katie Halper, Abby Martin, Tom Hartman had me on. I don't see TYT covering it. I literally messaged somebody I still know at TYT that I talk to occasionally, and I said, cover it, don't even mention my name. If that's the problem, don't mention my name. Just say The Intercept. I don't need credit. I doubt they're covering it. By the way, the network that invested to send me to Flint many times. Crickets. Wonder why. This is multiple cover-ups. You got the government cover-up, and now you have the media covering it up. Back to the story. Prosecutors' behind-the-scenes legal battle with the governor continued into 2017. As a result, Flood filed a second motion to compel Governor Snyder to comply with the original 2016 subpoena. In the brief in support of the people of the state of Michigan's second motion to compel Governor Rick Snyder's compliance with investigative subpoena, kind of long, but that was the name of the document, obtained by The Intercept, Flood wrote that the governor was, quote, now simply refusing to comply with significant requirements of the subpoena. So let's get back here. This is over a year into the criminal investigation. Over a year into the criminal investigation. The taxpayers of Flint, the taxpayers of Michigan, were paying for Governor Snyder's legal defense, his criminal legal defense. That was taxpayer money paying for his legal defense. And they weren't even defending him. All they were doing was stonewalling the prosecutors. The people of Michigan and the people of Flint should get their money back. This governor wasn't cooperating. A year into a criminal investigation, and the Republican Attorney General wasn't making him cooperate, wasn't allowing search warrants. This is as corrupt as you can even imagine. And keep sharing this live stream. Welcome new Status Coup YouTube member, Link Soul. And by the way, I'm not pushing it right now, but you do know breaking stories like this were only made possible. The only reason we were able to break this story, the only reason we were able to break the story in The Intercept in January, the only reason we were able to break the Flint story in March of 2020, the only reason we were able to just go on a 2-week reporting tour covering exploding homelessness, mass evictions, the Breonna Taylor cover-up, Joe Manchin's corruption, was because of our paid Status Coup members. That's it. We're at 1,900 members. We're desperate to get to 2,000 and more. We're not like other outlets that are asking you to sign up as a member, this and that, so that you could listen to us bloviate bullshit and be like a slightly edgier version of MSNBC. We're asking you to sign up so that we can fund this journalism, because we weren't sitting in our homes digging into this. I went to Flint. Jen went to Flint many, many times. Between TYT and Status Coup, I've been there 17 times. With Status Coup, I believe I've been there 8 times. I don't have a money tree in my backyard. You paid for this. You literally paid for this. I'm not exaggerating. Through paid membership, through the GoFundMe support, all of that. This is you guys. Yeah, we did it in The Intercept, mainly for legal protection, because there's a lot of documents in this story that are confidential, not supposed to be made public, and we need to be smart and protect ourselves legally under the umbrella of, frankly, an outlet with significant legal resources. That's a large reason these stories are usually delayed, because going through mainstream media outlets and their lawyers, it takes a while. We're hoping sooner than later we're going to be able to self-publish these kinds of stories if we could afford legal resources. We have talked to one organization that does pro bono legal work, and we're having conversations with them. So, documents that Snyder had provided prosecutors were, quote, patently non-compliant with the requirements of the subpoena, Special Prosecutor Flood wrote, adding that the governor's lawyer had, quote, arbitrarily decided not to search for large numbers of documents prosecutors had asked for. He argued that Snyder had, quote, custody or effective control over massive amounts of information that is relevant to an ongoing investigation. That's the special prosecutor writing to a judge, essentially, the governor's refusing to give us documents. He's hiding documents. He didn't use the words obstruction of justice, but what do you call that? Is the governor above the law? Apparently. Apparently. Thank you. A sane comment. Truth bearer. I disagree with Ryan Grimm more often than not, but at least they posted this story. Thank you. Again, I've actually never met Ryan Grimm. I don't really know him. I've only worked with him on these 2 stories. I was at TYT when he was a contributor. We talked a few times. I don't like every story The Intercept does. I think some of their stories are crap. I think a lot of their stories on Russia was crap and Russiagating. Obviously, they messed up with Reality Winner, which isn't a small thing. But like, when did the progressive standard be that like politicians and journalists need to do what we want 1000% of the time, or they're a fraud and they're a sellout? Like, grow the fuck up. I know that there's a lot of hosts pushing that and creating this, black or white world where you're a sellout and you're a fraud if you don't rant at the squad, or you don't rant at Bernie, and you don't do this. Like, Jesus Christ, if that is going to be the new standard in the progressive movement, we're never going to achieve anything. And we're just going to be fighting each other rather than fighting the corporate democratic establishment, corporate America, and the media. It's not, hey, Ryan Grimm's a public figure. He's open to criticism. I'm open to criticism. But like, there's levels to criticism. And when you're starting to get to a level where like, you're not even focused anymore on the issues or the stories. You're just focused on who's the last progressive standing, who's the real pure progressive. It's like it's like Survivor. Who's the last pure progressive on the island? It's ridiculous. People need to grow up. Some of the relevant documents that Snyder was withholding, Flood wrote, included, quote, MDEQ governor's briefings. So this is briefings from the environmental department to the governor, the governor's daily briefings, executive staff meetings, and Flint water crisis related conference calls, updates, and reports that were all, quote, in the custody or effective control of the governor. So let's drill into all of this. A criminal investigation, investigating whether the governor knew about these things, didn't take action to stop it, was involved in stopping the news from getting to the public of Flint's toxic water, i.e., allowed people to die. That governor would not give prosecutors for 3 years briefings he received from the environmental department. The environmental department was heavily involved in causing the Flint water crisis. He would not give over the briefings he received daily across the board from all his departments. It's called the governor's daily briefings. He only gave a couple, and they were not from the critical periods, including September and October of 2014. Wouldn't give over executive staff meetings, notes from them, conference call reports. You're telling me that's not obstruction of justice? And to be clear, because the lawyer with The Intercept noted this, and he did make it's a fair point. What Snyder was doing technically was not illegal. There was no court order mandating that he give over these documents. That's the fault of the Republican Attorney General who didn't allow the special prosecutor and his team to issue a search warrant and just take the devices, take the documents, which should have been done 5 years ago in 2016. So technically, to the letter of the law, it's not that he was breaking the law. However, I did speak with lawyers. Cumulatively, when you add these things with other things, it's obstruction of justice. You're obstructing a criminal investigation. The information you're sending over aren't even usable because they are missing everybody that the email was sent to, everybody that was copied on the email, everybody that was blind copied, who forwarded the emails, who received the emails that were forwarded. It's not, honestly, this is not the fault of the investigative team. This was the fault of the Attorney General who was shackling them because he wanted to win the governor and replace Rick Snyder. He put his political ambitions ahead of justice. It's sickening. It's absolutely sickening. And by the way, why do you think the governor would not give prosecutors his daily briefings from September and October 2014. If you've read our previous report with The Intercept, you will know October 2014, which was weeks before the governor was up for re-election as governor, the governor, we obtained his phone calls with his chief of staff and his health director. Over 2 days in October 2014, they were on the phone 22 times. Why that's important? The investigation mapped out how often did these people talk over many years. Barely. It was 2 days, rapid fire, phone call, phone call, phone call. And the prosecutors, because of the phone tree, who was called and when, is particularly that the governor would not talk. The governor was not contacting the health director directly. The chief of staff was used as a cutout. So the governor would call the chief of staff. They'd get off the phone. The chief of staff right away would call the health director. This happened 5 or 6 times. The health director and the chief of staff would talk. Phone call ends. Chief of staff immediately calls the governor. On one day, in the afternoon, health officials sent out an email about a concerning phone call they got from an environmental official about the Legionnaire's disease outbreak in Flint. So again, health department sends out an email internally about a concerning call they just got from an environmental official about the Legionnaire's disease spread. That environmental official was trying to stop the health official and the health department from making a public announcement. So don't publicly tell the people they're drinking toxic water. And in writing said, the governor's office is involved. 2 hours after that email, less than 2 hours after that email, chief of staff, health director, talk again. They get off the phone, chief of staff calls the governor right away. So this October 2014 time period was critical. We also found evidence, and this is in the original Intercept story we did in January. Let me get the link to that. I just dropped it in the super chat. We also found evidence in that previous story that there were meeting notes. There were meeting notes. So the environmental department had a meeting. The notes from that meeting in October 2014, just a few weeks before Snyder's reelection, the meeting notes showed that it said governor's briefings. Briefings as in plural, not just one briefing, plural. It had a blurb about governor's briefings, and that blurb after the governor's briefing said, talked about the Legionnaire's disease in Flint. So presumably, these were meeting notes about what they talked about in the meeting, and in the meeting, they presumably talked about briefings that were sent to the governor, which included information about the Legionnaire's disease spreading in Flint. Why is that crucial? Because Snyder told Congress he didn't know about Legionnaire's until 16 months later. So the governor won't hand over his daily briefings. I wonder what's in his daily briefings from September or October 2014. This is about as clear-cut as a cover-up as you're ever going to read or you're ever going to find out about. It's really not complicated. They erased phones. They deleted text messages. The governor refused to cooperate, withheld potential evidence for 3 years. Moving on. And by the way, I think Thomas just said this. Let me find it. I think Thomas said something like, Snyder's never going to be held accountable. Just let it go, Jordan. First of all, I'm a journalist, so I'm not going to let go rampant corruption. I have sat on porches with Flint children who cannot count to 10 anymore, who cannot recite the alphabet anymore, who have trouble walking, children. I have sat on porches with 30-something-year-olds in Flint who look like they're 70, No disrespect to them. I have literally stood there as some Flint residents have had heart palpitations where I thought they were having a heart attack. And they told me, no, that's just daily ever since I got sick. So I'm not letting that go. And secondly, I was told by a lot of people in Michigan, including officials, that the only reason the governor was charged with anything, was because of our reporting last year in Vice that exposed the first parts of the cover-up. So if you think this stuff doesn't matter, listen, it's not enough. A misdemeanor is not enough, in my view. But real journalists don't just let it go. If that's the case, why should we have journalists? Why should we even be politically active? If it's all for nothing, why don't you just get some whiskey or weed or tea or whatever, put on 90 Day Fiancé and check out mentally? Sounds like a plan. Moving on. Snyder and his lawyers were particularly obstinate about not providing prosecutors with the governor's daily briefings from the summer and fall of 2014. So I just told you about this. Considering that Snyder's health and environmental departments were already communicating about Flint's Legionella outbreak in October 2014, access to the governor's daily briefings would allow investigators to see if Snyder had received notice of the deadly outbreak during this time. Nearly a year and a half earlier than the January 2016 period, Snyder testified to Congress that he became aware. As The Intercept previously reported, investigators found potential evidence that Snyder was notified much earlier. Notes from an October 22, 2014 MDEQ managers meeting, that's the Environmental Department managers meeting, that included the blurb "Governor's Briefings" with a corresponding mention of the Legionella outbreak in Flint. The memo, which came 2 weeks before Snyder's reelection, seemed like a smoking gun. Written notice to the governor 16 months earlier than he claimed to have learned about the outbreak. As The Intercept also reported, investigators had other reasons to believe that the governor knew about Legionnaire's disease in Flint as early as October 2014, after finding a suspicious 2-day blitz of phone calls between Snyder, his chief of staff, and the director of the health department in October 2014. Calls that investigators speculated amounted to the trio working to prevent news of the outbreak from going public. I'd actually change that word because the prosecutors weren't speculating. They concluded, based on the amount of phone calls, how often these people talked before then, which wasn't often, and the fact that the health department and the environmental department were trading communications during that same week about the Legionnaire's outbreak. They concluded that that was the three of them trying to cover up the Legionnaire's outbreak and stop it from going public before the governor's reelection. So it's a little more of a speculation. But prosecutors were not able to obtain Snyder's actual briefings from that time. Instead, the governor provided investigators with daily briefings from less pertinent periods that were also heavily redacted. A source familiar with the matter told The Intercept. One such briefing provided to investigators, obtained by The Intercept, was from April 2013, a year before the Flint River switch, with most of the briefings unrelated to the topic of Flint's water and heavily redacted. Snyder, quote, picked the most sanitized ones and redacted everything on every page almost, the source said. So the governor of Michigan, let this sink in. The governor of Michigan refused to hand over key documents for 3 years while charging the taxpayers, I think taxpayers paid like $7 to $8 million total for his criminal legal defense. And really that money was going so he could stonewall prosecutors, refuse to hand over things, literally refused to hand over his daily briefings that one would assume might have incriminating evidence against him. And this was all fucking allowed to go on for 3 years. Frankly, because the Republican Attorney General wanted to replace Snyder as governor and put his political ambitions before justice. Because this wasn't the fault of the investigative team. they actually did a damn good job, in my view, with one hand tied behind their back. Can you imagine if this went on? If there was a criminal investigation on Trump or the January 6th insurrectionists or name your Republican governor? Oh my God, the media would fucking flip out. Absolutely flip out. But we know the Democratic Party would absolutely flip out. And by the way, just so you know, in January, when we broke the previous story, the House Oversight Committee, controlled by Democrats now, that's the committee that Snyder went in front in March 2016, and from the looks of it, perjured himself. I asked them, in light of the story we just broke, are you going to bring him back in? I believe perjury is still a pretty serious crime in America. I believe. They gave me a mixed word salad that they didn't, they were monitoring the criminal investigation in Michigan. I emailed them again today in light of this new story with serious evidence of a cover-up. Along with the story I sent you in January, is there a reason you guys wouldn't bring the governor back in for questioning? Because the state investigation, the state criminal investigation, has absolutely nothing to do with Snyder's testimony to the House Oversight Committee in 2016, which then was Republican controlled, but now is democratically controlled. And by the way, Congressman Elijah Cummings, who was the chairman of the Oversight Committee before he died, I think he died in 2020, 2019, I don't remember. He was pushing to drag Snyder back, but the Republicans controlled Congress. So before he was chairman, the Republicans controlled Congress. He was fighting. The mayor of Flint told me this. Elijah Cummings was fighting to drag Snyder back in front of Congress. So why don't you honor Elijah Cummings' legacy and bring the governor back in? If there's nothing to see here, I'm sure he has an explanation for all these things, right? Moving back, and we're winding down the story. I know it's long. In Flood's motion, he also made mention of, quote, executive office cell phones that were not timely imaged or forensically preserved, highlighted by the Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley, whose cell phone wasn't forensically preserved until January of 2017, according to Flood. Calley did not respond to the Intercept's request for comment. So let's get this straight. You got the governor's right-hand man interfering with the investigation, trying to pay off sick residents. And then you have the lieutenant governor, meaning the number 2 government official in all of Michigan. Only a year after the criminal investigation was his phone forensically imaged, which means basically copied, so that prosecutors could have his phone calls, his text messages, all that. For a year, the lieutenant governor's phone was not copied. Nothing to see here. Interesting that the lieutenant governor has no comment either. Flood also explained that he had relied on the, quote, good faith representations from the governor's attorney that Snyder's subpoena response would be completed by, quote, January or February of 2017, but that, quote, it became clear by May of 2017 that the governor had no intention of complying with significant requirements of the subpoena. On top of that, the documents that Snyder had given to prosecutors were fraught with technical issues, including, quote, duplication issues, blank withheld documents, missing custodians, unidentified custodians, and inconsistent and questionable redactions, the special prosecutor wrote in the second motion to compel. Furthermore, Flood stated that the governor's attorney hadn't produced any privilege logs, lists lawyers provide prosecutors with for each document they are withholding and the justification for doing so. This is standard in law. Attorney-client privilege, If you're withholding documents, you have to have a list of the documents and your reasoning for withholding them. So you're talking 2017, a year after the investigation. The governor's attorney hadn't provided any list of documents he was withholding and why? Huh. By the end of 2018, so now we're 3 years into this investigation, 2 years after Snyder was originally subpoenaed for the documents, Flood petitioned a judge to allow any future motions he would file to compel the governor to be made public. And by the way, notice this timeline. By the end of 2018, 2 years after Snyder was originally subpoenaed for Flint water documents, Flood petitioned a judge to allow any future motions he would file to compel the governor to be made public. Snyder's lawyer objected, lobbying to keep review of all contested documents confidential, known in law as in-camera review. Well, let me tell you what happened by the end of 2018. The Republican Attorney General, Bill Schuette, had lost the governor's race to Governor Gretchen Whitmer. So remember, the Republican Attorney General was tying the hands of prosecutors and investigators for 3 years because he was running for governor and didn't, it's kind of hard to go after the sitting Republican governor and get donors and Republican support if you're trying to, put him in prison. But after he lost in November 2018, suddenly prosecutors are allowed to file basically ask a judge to make all of these documents public, no longer confidential. Isn't it interesting how that suddenly happened after the Republican Attorney General lost? Interesting timing. In the motion, Flood revealed that Snyder's lawyer had stated that he was now considering, quote, whether the governor would assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination as a basis in refusing to fully respond to the subpoena. Among other things, Flood wrote he had evidence of, quote, data stores and devices from key executive officials under the effective or actual control of the governor that were not searched, relevant documents and data that were not preserved despite having notice from the criminal investigation, and missing material information that was required to be produced. Flood wrote it would be, quote, a travesty of justice if Snyder were able to continue to not cooperate with the subpoena. Soon after the 2019 discovery of 23 boxes in the basement of a state building containing Flint water documents, hard drives, and cell phones, Nessel, the Attorney General, fired Flood as special prosecutor in April 2019. Solicitor General Fadwa Hammoud, who was appointed by Nessel to replace Flood as the top Flint water prosecutor, claimed that under Flood, legal discovery was not fully and properly pursued from the onset of this investigation. So, that's basically Flood, the special prosecutor, being thrown under the bus. It's not that legal discovery or information or documents weren't sought after. It's that the Republican Attorney General, who was controlling the whole damn thing over the head of the special prosecutor, was allowing Governor Snyder to withhold those documents, was allowing Governor Snyder to stonewall the prosecutors, was refusing the investigation's request to just issue a search warrant, execute a search warrant, and take it all. So, to be clear, this Attorney General who came in and just cleaned house of the entire investigation team, which, by the way, kind of hard to restart an investigation if you get rid of everybody who did the investigation for 3 years, all the people that have the knowledge and institutional knowledge of the investigation. She got rid of, I think, almost all of them. So you're basically restarting from nothing. If she wanted to get rid of like the special prosecutor and some top people, that's one thing. But she fired almost the whole team. For the record, the special prosecutor, Todd Flood, he didn't respond to several requests for comment. Along with Flood, Nessel fired Andy Arena, the investigation's chief investigator, and the majority of the criminal team responsible for charging 15 state and city officials with crimes over the Flint water crisis over a 3-year investigation. In June 2019, prosecutors with Nessel's revamped Flint water investigation issued search warrants to seize the cell phones Snyder had used while in office, along with other mobile devices belonging to him. This should have been done 3 years ago, but the Republican AG would not allow it. With the seizure of Snyder's devices, prosecutors also seized devices connected to dozens of members of his administration. Soon after, prosecutors dropped the remaining charges against 8 state and city officials, including the Health Department Director, Lyons, Michigan Chief Medical Executive, Wells, and 2 of Snyder's Flint emergency managers, citing flaws in the original 3-year investigation and that all evidence was not pursued. A year and a half later, in January 2021, Nessel's prosecutors charged Snyder with 2 counts of willful neglect of duty, a misdemeanor charge, for willfully neglecting his mandatory legal duties under the Michigan Constitution and the Emergency Management Act, thereby failing to protect the health and safety of Flint residents. 8 other state and city officials, including Baird, Snyder's chief of staff, Agan, and 2 ex-Flint emergency managers appointed by Snyder, were faced with a slew of felony and misdemeanor charges related to the water crisis. In March, a judge granted Snyder's lawyers a several-month hold on the criminal case against him to allow Snyder's defense time to go through what they claimed to be 21 million documents. They only had 5 years to go through it. In April, the Flint water crisis entered its 7th year. After 2 investigations spanning different attorney generals, no state of Michigan or city of Flint official has faced a jury or been convicted. Beyond the search for justice, residents and activists on the ground have passionately challenged claims, often reported by the national media, that their water is safe to drink, telling the Intercept that residents are still experiencing rashes and receiving often odorous and discolored water. Quote, since 2014, Flint residents have been posting photos and videos of rashes, discolored water, health questions, and concerns about high water bills. Melissa Mays, who we had on yesterday, a Flint resident and activist, told The Intercept, for 7 years, we have been consistently dismissed and ignored. We are halfway through 2021, and we are still getting our water through corroded pipes and fixtures. But somehow those in charge have decided to tell the world everything is fine. But common sense tells us that our water is still flowing through damaged and contaminated infrastructure, means that our water is still not fixed. Peter Hammer, a Wayne State University law professor who produced a definitive report on the Flint water crisis that identified structural racism as its root cause, expressed serious concerns about Snyder's evasion of prosecutors' requests for years, as well as wiped phones belonging to state officials. Quote, if true, this is a disturbing pattern that goes far beyond the problems of having inadequate state laws requiring disclosure of public records, Hammer told The Intercept. All citizens have an obligation to comply with the criminal process. This is substantially more true for public officials. There could be no accountability without transparency. Hammer added that if he had the details The Intercept is revealing at his disposal from the very beginning of his analysis of the water crisis, his conclusion would have shifted, quote, would have shifted towards intentional forms of misconduct and criminal behavior. On whether Snyder was involved in efforts to cover up state officials' knowledge of the Flint water crisis, Hammer was blunt. Quote, if the actions reported here are accurate, it is impossible for me to believe that the governor was not aware of the efforts to hide and destroy damaging information. This is a story we worked on for 6 months. This is a story we worked on for 6 months while trying to do a daily live stream, while traveling on other stories. To tell you the truth, in how long I've been doing, probably 12 years I've been doing journalism. This is by far the biggest story I've ever broken. It's personal to me. It's personal to me. It's personal. It's personal to me. It's personal to me that I talk to Flint residents who cannot get the coronavirus vaccine because their immune system is too weak and their doctors say they could die. It's personal to me and Jen, by the way. Jen is just as passionate as I am on this. It's personal to me. Been there 5 years, 17 times. It's personal when the residents I've met over the years, I just see them, hear them, because I've gone back a lot. It's personal when you just see them slowly dying. They're slowly dying. Liver problems, kidney problems, Parkinson's, brain tumors, cancers, epilepsy, crippling bone and joint pain. They don't have Medicare for all, folks. It's disgusting to me that an American city can be poisoned. And by the way, I want to be clear because I hear comments all the time. Of course, it's not just Flint. Indigenous people have been poisoned. Black people have been poisoned all over this country, all over the world. But I'm only one person. I can't cover and break all of it. Jen's only one person. We're an independent outlet. We barely have a staff. We don't take corporate money. We never have. And we do the best we can with limited resources. But it's absolutely disgusting to me that in a country that supposedly is, you know, the beacon of freedom and, you know, the envy of the world and all this other bullshit platitudes, that an American city can be poisoned. The people who poison them cover it up in real time, cover it up after it goes public. Are charged with parking tickets. Essentially. Go about their lives or living in their mansions. They have their doctors to treat them. They drink very clean water, I'm sure. It's absolutely disgusting to me. This cover-up that we broke, and by the way, I will repeat, this is the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. You cannot show me anything more corrupt as this. You cannot show me anything more multi-layered than this. You're talking a governor, environmental department, health department, governor's top aides. How is it in a country and all of these outlets are ranting, oh, democracy is under attack and the free press is under attack? Well, how is it that the free press, if you want to call them press, because I think they're a bunch of fucking stenographers for the powerful and for corporate America, how is it that story after story after story we have broken, Jen and I, part of breaking this, I drove to Michigan during a pandemic, there and back with a bad back. It fucked up my back for weeks after I drove. To not fly during a pandemic. As part of the reporting for this story. How is it that these people could literally called themselves journalism. I'm talking to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, CNN, MSNBC, the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, the Flint Journal, BuzzFeed, Daily Beast, Rolling Stone, the Atlantic. I could go on. How did he sleep at night? Not even doing a small write-up of a bombshell cover-up. How does Anderson Cooper, who goes to fucking Texas to give wet kisses to cowboy Jeff Bezos and slobber over Jeff Bezos after his $5.5 billion dick voyage to space, how does he sleep at night? Probably very nice. Rachel Maddow, to her credit, originally was the first high-profile journalist to cover this back in 2016. But then she kind of took a detour to the new Cold War and pushing that. I'm told, oh, she's covered this a lot, Jordan. Oh, yeah? Show me how much she's covered this since 2016, aside from a few minutes here and there. I have reached out to Rachel Maddow. I have reached out to her executive producer. I have reached out to MSNBC executives. I even willingly said, and by the way, you know what I think about MSNBC, but the point is, we need to get this out to as many people as possible, whether we love the outlets or not. Okay, big boys and girls, this is about getting a cover-up and justice out. I basically presented them with the reporting, the evidence. I said, Rachel Maddow can take the lead for all I care. This isn't about credit for me. This isn't about winning an award. It's about justice. Nothing. I emailed her executive producer today. We'll see. We'll see if he gets back to me. I doubt it. If it doesn't involve Trump, if it doesn't involve Russia, I guess they don't give a shit. Sorry, my cord is stuck. Thank you for the super chats. I'll read them when I'm done. Keep them coming. Like, how does the Detroit... I literally met with a fucking editor at the Detroit Free Press when I drove to Michigan. I met with an editor. Their investigations editor from the Detroit Free Press. I met with him in a parking lot. It was like 15 degrees out, I think. We sat in our cars because of the pandemic with our windows open. Without going into details, I showed him everything. He says to me, and I quote, I regret we haven't done more on Flint. We've covered the health stuff, but not really the cover-up. He says to me, you got great stuff here, but it's, it's kind of circumstantial. I said, first of all, you're not a prosecutor. I'm not a prosecutor. You don't have to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. Cases are built on a lot of circumstantial evidence. A lot of the best journalism is built on building sources, documents, and some circumstantial evidence. I'm handing you, not my opinion, Snyder's phone calls with his chief of staff, his health director, meeting notes that show Snyder might have been informed in writing about the deadly waterborne bacteria that killed people, that he told Congress. I didn't know anything about it till a year and a half later. I showed them quite a lot more. A couple days later, he says, I brought it to my editor. We're going to pass. I sent him a sharply worded response saying, I'm absolutely dumbfounded. It is stunning to me that the largest newspaper in Michigan, it's not even that you're passing, you're helping to stop this information from getting out. And he basically sent me a bunch of bullshit that they just can't invest in it. They can't invest in it. at this time. I found out later they had 6 or 7 reporters in their investigative unit, but they couldn't invest in this. By the way, the story was handed to them. They didn't have to do anything other than edit it. This is why I've told my audience, this is why Jen has told you, I'm all for, protest outside Pelosi's office, protest outside, Mitch McConnell's office, protest, protest outside corporations, BlackRock's and Blackstone's office, protest pipelines, do it all. But why is there no protest outside your local media outlets? Why is there no protest outside CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post? Why are these people allowed to cover up what's really going on and just be comfortable? To be clear, I'm not talking about being violent. I'm not talking about sending them anything in the mail. None of that. We're talking civil disobedience, peaceful. Do you really think that part of why we live in the United Corporations of America, do you really think that part of why this corruption is allowed to continue? I got news for you. I've seen this in the flesh, on the road. 80% of the reason is because there is a structure in this country known as the media that ignores it, that looks the other way, that helps cover it up. I know for a fact certain stories we pitched to big outlets, and we spoke to those big outlets. I'm talking about the Rolling Stone here. Rolling Stone. And they verbally told us they were very interested, and even the editor-in-chief of Rolling Stone said to me, we'll talk, we'll have to move on to the contract tomorrow. I know for a fact, for some reason, some of those outlets were then contacted by other journalists to try and push them not to do the story. I know for a fact, and Jen knows this for a fact, that I'm not going to go into crazy detail, but I do know for a fact that I was specifically targeted with misinformation and smears as I was building my reporting on Flint. So don't think that we talk about the corporate media for clicks, or we talk about the corporate media for a bumper sticker. We mean it. The corporate media is to me 75-80% of why we live in a new Gilded Age, of why the struggle, the poisoning of Flint, the cover-up, the pipelines going through Standing Rock, the pipelines going through Minnesota right now, Line 3, the local and state level, rampant corruption. The black men that you've never heard of that have been executed. We went down in 2019 to Dallas to cover Botham Jean. He was a 26-year-old black man, came from the Caribbean to study here. A white police officer barged into his room, shot him dead. She claimed, I thought it was my room, because she was the floor under him. I mistook the apartment and I thought he was an intruder. Aside from a few articles, nobody covered it. There was no mass media attention down in Dallas for Botham Jean. I have literally had editors at news outlets tell me, well, this kind of happened so long ago, and, we don't really think people would be interested, and there's so much going on now with Trump and this and that, and, it would be a lot in terms of investment for us, obviously editing and legal having to look at it, all this. And, let's be real, not a lot of payoff, meaning clicks. And what I said to that person was, first of all, everybody has to feed their family, but if you guys are not doing bombshell investigative reporting, because it will take too much effort, which, by the way, every time I've spoken with these people, we did the reporting. It was already done. Because it won't get clicks, then you need to reevaluate why you're in this industry. That's number one. Number two, I told them that is a myth. It is a myth that major, hard-hitting, local, state-level corruption, injustices, if you report on it, if you do investigations, it won't be clicky. That's bullshit. You want to know how I know? Because we've built a business on doing it. And I know there's a humongous hunger for this kind of reporting out there. I know there's a huge untapped audience that would die for reporting like this from us. They just have no idea we exist because YouTube buries us. We got 121,000 subscribers. Look at the viewership. I love you all, but it shouldn't be this small. People don't know we exist. When Kyle did a video on one of our stories and told people to subscribe, we got 1,500 subscribers in a day. And so many of the comments were, we didn't know you existed. They don't see it on YouTube. They don't see it on Twitter. It's not in their feed. I want to ask Rachel Maddow specifically, how do you sleep? You're the one who broke this to begin with. Made it a big national story. You have Rachel Maddow, if you don't know, she's got a goddamn army of producers, an army of researchers. It's way more than we have. By a lot. She doesn't even have to do the work. They could have followed up on this. She could have taken credit. All I can say, and we're going to wrap up soon. All I can say is, I'm not going to lie to you. There's some days I do wonder, is what I'm doing anything? Is taking all these trips to Flint and other places, the reporting trips through multiple states, speaking to homeless people, speaking to, people being evicted, Breonna Taylor's family. What is it accomplishing? There's days where I'm in my head and I'm down in the dumps. And, I don't get to a point where I just want to close the lights and call it a day. But sometimes you wonder, you look at the kind of journalists that climb up ladders and go viral and are highlighted and win awards. And I've never really cared about those things. But you look at the stories they do, which are all Washington, horse race, food fight, bullshit. Nothing with real life consequences. And you wonder, am I living in the Twilight Zone? I mean, I did wonder that when I was at Standing Rock. I'm here, Native Americans are getting shot at, grenades, freezing water, pepper spray, mace, people getting shot point blank by rubber bullets in the head. I saw one guy's scalp was almost ripped off by a rubber bullet. And you go back and you watch TV that night and it's, they're talking about Trump's tweets. And you wonder, can I ever break through? Can we ever break through? But I don't think success or journalistic success is always about, did that person you exposed go to jail? Did that corporation have to pay? Was there ironclad, concrete results? I know Glenn Greenwald has said that in the past. I don't agree with that. Obviously, you want the results. You want to your journalism to force accountability. You want people to be held accountable. You want justice for the people you're reporting on. But I don't think that's the only measurement of whether journalism matters. I think the measurement is, are you helping to wake more people up to what's really going on? Are you helping to break through the corporate brainwashing even a little bit? to inform people, to enlighten people, to inspire people on the fact that you're living in essentially you're living in an organized mafia masquerading as a country. That you're living in a new Gilded Age. That your government is more interested in profit and will allow you to die to get that profit. That our politicians are not public servants, they're public sociopaths. That our media is a bunch of paid public relations stooges putting makeup on and pretending to be journalists. The best moments of my life, other than, my wife and time with my family, time with my dog, have been when people approach me and tell me, I saw your story and I got in the car and I drove to Standing Rock. Or Native Americans telling me, if not for your cameras there, they would have started firing real bullets. Or the people in Flint telling me, you're the only one I got, and telling Jen that too. And the Amazon workers telling me what's going on there is starting to get more traction because we've been reporting. And this is honestly a huge reason why I've criticized and shouted and ranted in the past few weeks. If TMZ-ification of independent media and the just utter, hot take machine for clicks that independent media has become. Everybody likes entertainment once in a while. Everybody is, subject to click on something that's clicky. Everybody wants a little gossip from time to time. If people hate TYT, it's natural to, want to watch channels bashing them. I got no love for TYT. It doesn't matter to me if they live or die. But how are you supposed to put a dent or counter the multi-billion-dollar corporate propaganda industry that is the media if the only alternative, which is independent media, is spending more time attacking one another and canceling one another and doing live streams about other shows' commentary and sometimes about covering other shows' commentary about other shows' commentary? Folks, that ain't going to create change. It's going to create a lot of entertainment and rage on the internet, but it's not going to do a damn thing to get you clean water, Medicare for all, free public college, banning fracking, saving the planet, ending private prisons, reparations for black people, taking indigenous people out of poverty. I'm not saying you should never criticize journalists or criticize commentators. Everybody's a public figure. You could criticize me too. We're all big boys and gals, or we should be. But when that's the only thing being done for months and months and months, and actual journalism is completely being reported, I got to beg most of the time to get these stories retweeted by independent outlets, much less covered. With a few exceptions, Kyle Kalinske recently has done a few videos on our stories, unsolicited. I didn't ask him to, and I appreciate that he did. Breaking Points had me on to talk about our recent road trip. I appreciate that. I don't expect them to do their scheduling and pick their topics around what we do, but Jesus. I'd also ask the viewers that, because I've seen viewers say, Jordan, I thought about what you've said and I was kind of guilty of that and just clicking on these things and thinking this was the most important thing. But I would say to viewers, listen, I think we're all angry. I think we're all upset. I think we're all disappointed. I think at certain times we all feel hopeless. A lot of us rode the revolution of Bernie 2016, 2020. A lot of us donated to AOC and the rest of them, or volunteered or made phone calls. And it just seems like they all screwed you, right? Or they're not fighting hard enough. Or they're cooperating too much. So all of that's understandable, and that anger is righteous. But you can't let your anger and frustration overtake actually achieving things, actually making progress. Because in the real world, not the new independent media, you don't really have to agree with people on everything. You don't need to be in agreement 100% of the time. Journalists or commentators can disagree with you or not agree with you on certain things. Politicians can maybe fail you at times or have differences with you. Sure, pressure them, shame them. But the complete and utter nihilism that has taken over, and the complete and utter, I mean, I literally had people today saying, I can't retweet this because it's with The Intercept. I responded to one person. If you're the type of person that would literally choose not to get the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century that has poisoned people, killed people, and is slowly killing people now, if you would not get that to as many people as possible because you don't like the outlet it's in, or you don't like the editor on the story, then I have no time for you. Because you have literally lost your mind. I could care less if you think Ryan Grimm is Lucifer. I could care less if you think The Intercept is bad. This is not about personalities. It's not about news. It's not about news channels or news websites. It's about the people of Flint, God damn it. It's about holding people accountable. Like, come on. You can't let your anger, you can't let your nihilism, you can't let your frustration and your disappointment or your disagreements with certain people totally overtake your logic. That's not being a progressive. That's being a loon. That's being completely narrow-minded, completely short-sighted. Remember why you got into this. Was it to be the most pure progressive out there and make sure every politician and every media host feeds you what you want to hear 1,000% of the time? Or is it to fucking make progress? I'm not talking about incrementalism. I'm talking about progress. I mean, Jesus, people got fucking irate because I dared to credit Bernie Sanders, who, because of Bernie Sanders, that's why the reconciliation bill is at $3.5 trillion. I had people telling me that's nothing. Are you kidding me? The Democratic Party would have never gotten anywhere near $3.5 trillion if not for Bernie Sanders playing hardball. He played hardball by saying, yeah, no, if we don't have a reconciliation bill, I'm not going to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And without his vote, there would be no bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's the hardball. The people who have been criticizing him have been criticizing him for not playing. And then when he plays it, not enough. He also said, I'm not taking anything less than $6 trillion. Of course, he knew he's not getting $6 trillion, but that's how you negotiate. As he said in the campaign, you demand the full loaf right out of the gate. You might get half of the loaf, but you demand the full loaf. And people were criticizing because, oh, he's a sellout, he's a fraud. Like, do you not want the investments? Is that $3.5 trillion giving us Medicare for all? No. Is it getting us free college? No. But we don't have the presidency. We don't have majority of Congress people and senators as progressives. So, like, I'm not saying take what you can get, but if you think $3.5 trillion, which, by the way, is the largest social spending package in modern American history, when you add that to potentially $600 billion of the bipartisan deal, that's over $4 trillion. If you can't see that that's a good thing, then you are lost. That doesn't mean the Democratic Party is good. It doesn't mean the Democratic Party is not corrupt. That's the thing. Nuance has been completely banned in some corners of the progressive movement. So, anyway, I'm going on a tangent. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing this story out. Right now, we have over 1,400 retweets, which is good. That's a good number so far, but we got to get more. Got to get more people sharing this. Frankly, I've sent it to Michael Moore, sent it to his producer. I'm really hoping, I just put the tweet in there. You know, Michael Moore was nice enough to have me on his podcast in January when we broke the previous story for The Intercept. I hope he will have me on for this. Or Jen, or both. I hope he will tweet it. I hope he will rant. Because if you can't get Michael Moore to raise hell, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases, the media will start covering it when people like Michael Moore raise hell. They won't cover it on the merits. They'll cover it if celebrities and Michael Moore raise hell. So I really hope, start tweeting at Flint. I think that's his number, account. Hold on. Yeah, Flint. Start tweeting at him. Please, Michael. I'm not criticizing him. Maybe he hasn't seen it yet. I don't know. Please. Help us get this story out there. Help us force the media to cover it. Let me read some super chats that I missed. And I appreciate all of the super chats. Oh, Colin, were you not saving the rest of them? Fuck. All right. Let me see if I could find some. They disappear, unfortunately. Chris, $5. Jordan, you're too real, Jordan. I'm disappointed that channels have exploded over drama, but Status Coup is not. I got people to stop shopping Amazon because of you. Why, thank you. Listen, I don't, if other channels are growing, good for them. But, our focus is getting these stories out. Our focus is adding paid subscribers. So please join us, statuscoup.com/join, so we could keep funding this. It ain't easy to fund in-the-field reporting, the amount of in-the-field reporting we do, equipment. We got to pay for Jen, Colin, me, freelancers we use. It's not easy. It would be a lot easier to take money from degenerate corporatists. We do not. We do not. Let me read some super chats. Chris, $2. This is for clowns not sharing this because it's The Intercept. Thank you. Faint signals from Vega on Rockfin. Tip $2. Good work, Jen and Jordan. Thank you. Hello to our Rockfin viewers. Nick Coletti, $4.99. Thanks, Jordan. What you do matters to a lot of people. I appreciate that. Steve, $4.99. Keep shining the bright light on this crap. Steve, again, $4.99. Boycott Frito-Lay products to support the strike. I actually just aired an interview I did with Frito-Lay strikers earlier, so you could watch that. It's like an hour and 15 minutes, so it's pretty long, but it was really good. Link Saul, new YouTube member. Here, welcome to Status Cool. Thomas Horter, $5. Jordan, $5 is quite a bit for me now, but man, we will build this media revolution. Keep going, keep going. Kirk, $4.99. I'm from Flint, and I just want to say thank you to Status Coup family for covering this. We need you. Nobody is doing what y'all do. We'll stay at it, and I appreciate the comments from our Flint family. We will not stop fighting to get the truth out and justice. Let me read others. Lana Del hates the clock. $20. Glad you are not letting it go. These people need to be prosecuted, and Flint should be declared state of emergency for funds. Yes, as well as they should all receive Medicare for all. Kim, $1.99. More thanks. Love you, Jen and Jordan. Thank you. Natalie Williams, $5. I'm on a fixed income too, but this contribution is to thank you for covering the stories we wouldn't hear about otherwise. Kudos, Status Coup. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Natalie. Jody, $25. Thank you, Jordan and Jen. As a Michigander, I'm begging you not to let this story go. If you haven't noticed, I'm kind of stubborn. We're not letting it go. Deborah, $10. Thank you, Jordan, Jen, and all of Status Coup for all you do. Why, thank you. Chris Garrett, $5. Lack of pickup of this important story shows the fear of access and the deep corruption of the corporate media. They have failed us all. Couldn't say it better. Could not say it better, Chris. Faint signals from Vega, $5. Yes, your work is very important, Jordan and Jed, and it's on the record. It sure is. It sure is. And by the way, welcome new Status Coup member Dan. Welcome new Status Coup member Joe. So we're at 1,897. So 3 members away from 1,900, and then we could march forward, hopefully, to 2,000. Jody P, $25. Oh, I just read that. Thank you. Deborah Cochran, $10. Thank you, Jordan, Jen, and all of Status Coup for all you do. Thank you. Did I miss any? PH at Man TV, $5. Hashtag Cold Civil War. Don't know what that means, but thank you. Chris, $5. I read that. Julie, $5. Thank you. Mona Lisa, $19.99. Thanks, Jordan, for all your work. I love your painting. I can't pronounce this. Venkateswaran, NBC Tokyo coverage, 3 days plus 17 more days, 100 cameras, 178 analysts. NBC Flint coverage, 2,645 days, 0 cameras, 0 analysts. I am copying this and stealing it. I'm going to tweet that. So thank you very much. No, I'll give you credit. Thank you so much. That's an amazing point. I got to copy your name too. Actually, I'll just screenshot it. All right, gotcha. All right, losing my voice. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Don't know if I'm going to be live tomorrow. Might take the day off because I'm kind of burnt out. But if I'm not, I think we'll be live. I'm not sure. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your support. Please, please, if you haven't, retweet the story. Retweet the story. There's the link in the super chat. Thank you, Colin, behind the scenes. We will talk to you soon. And keep following my Twitter account and Jen's Twitter account for updates on this story. Peace out.